A widow stands behind the counter of her dying grocery store, clutching a foreclosure notice and whispering, "I just need someone to believe this place still matters." Moments later, a stranger on a motorcycle walks in, unaware that what he does next will change her life, her town, and the meaning of community forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun beat down on a stretch of cracked highway that sliced through the Arizona desert. Beyond the heat shimmer, a faded sign creaked in the wind. Lydia's Market serving our town. Since 1974, the paint had long since peeled, but the sign still clung to the front of the small building, like an old promise refusing to fade. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and wooden shelves mixed with the quiet sadness of a place that used to be alive. Lydia Monroe, a widow in her late 50s, moved slowly behind the counter. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tied back with a faded red bandana, the same one she wore the day she and her late husband, Tom, first opened the store. She still kept his picture taped to the cash register, a younger version of herself beside a tall man with a grin wide enough to light the room. Beneath the photo, someone had written in pen, "Love built this place." The bell above the door jingled, breaking the stillness. A man in a crisp gray suit stepped in, brushing desert dust from his sleeves. Lydia's smile faltered the instant she saw the clipboard in his hand. It was the same man who had come 3 times before Mr. Colby from the bank. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Monroe, I wish this were a better visit." She already knew. Her heart sank as she leaned on the counter for strength. He placed an envelope on the counter, thick with folded pages. "This is the final notice. The payment deadline has passed. The bank will proceed with foreclosure next week unless the full amount is paid." The paper looked harmless, but it might as well have been a guillotine. Lydia opened the envelope, scanning the words she already knew by heart. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Tom always said this store was his dream. It's all I have left of him." Mr. Colby adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry. I really am. But it's been 18 months of extensions. The board won't approve another delay." The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Lydia didn't cry. She'd done enough of that over the past year. She just stood there, gripping the counter until her knuckles went white. Outside, the desert wind kicked up, rattling the old "Help Wanted" sign that had hung untouched for months. Finally, she nodded, her voice thin but steady. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Colby. I'll figure something out." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply tipped his head and walked out. The bell chimed again as he left, and the door clicked shut behind him. Lydia stayed still, listening to the sound of the wind against the glass. The light through the window caught on a jar of homemade strawberry jam, Tom's favorite. She whispered to the picture on the register, "I'm trying, Tom. I really am." Outside, a low hum approached in the distance, the sound of a motorcycle climbing the highway. It grew louder, echoing off the empty street. The town of Dry Creek had long stopped expecting strangers, but one was coming now, and he was about to walk straight into a story that would change both their lives. The black motorcycle slowed as it approached the corner of Main Street, its tires crunching over loose gravel. The engine idled low, a steady hum against the quiet of the fading afternoon. Keanu Reeves lifted his helmet off, letting the desert air brush against his face. The sun hung low, turning the world gold. He glanced around one gas station, 2 boarded-up shops, and one little store that still looked alive. Lydia's Market. The hand-painted sign caught his eye. It wasn't just the name, it was the feeling it gave him. Like something out of another time. He parked his bike near the curb, dust rising around his boots as he swung his leg off the seat. For a moment, he just stood there, looking through the dusty window. where an older woman carefully arranged a display of canned goods. As if presentation still mattered even when no one was watching, Keanu pushed open the door, and the bell above it rang. The sound was gentle, but it carried a strange echo in the still air. Lydia looked up. Her tired smile appeared automatically, the kind that had been practiced for years, but still held warmth. "Afternoon," she said. "You look like you've been on the road a while. Long enough to appreciate a place like this," Keanu replied, his tone calm, easy. He scanned the shelves, handwritten price tags, baskets of apples that had seen better days, a cooler humming softly in the corner. Everything about it felt personal, cared for. "Coffee machine's down," Lydia said apologetically, "but I've got cold sodas in the back if you'd like one." "That sounds perfect," he said. She handed him a bottle, twisting the cap before passing it across the counter. As he reached for it, he noticed her hands strong, but marked with years of labor. No rings, just a faint tan line where one used to be. He smiled gently and set a few bills on the counter. Lydia shook her head. "That's too much, sir." He shrugged lightly. "Keep the change." She pushed the money back toward him. "No, please. I don't take tips. I just need someone to believe that a small store still has meaning." Her words landed heavier than she realized. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Keanu looked at her. Really. Looked into the eyes of someone who had held a community together with nothing but faith. He nodded slowly. "I believe it does," he said. The room fell into quiet again. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of an old wall clock, the faint rattle of the window pane. All of it blended into a fragile rhythm. Keanu took one last look around before walking to the door. "Thank you," he said simply. "Come back anytime," she replied. When the door closed behind him, Lydia exhaled softly and went back to stacking cans. Outside, Keanu paused beside his bike, glancing back at the window. He didn't know why, but something about that small store, about the woman inside, stayed with him. The sky deepened to amber as Keanu started his motorcycle. The engine's rumble echoed down the empty street, stirring a swirl of dust in front of Lydia's market. He hesitated before putting on his helmet, glancing one last time through the window. Inside, Lydia moved quietly behind the counter, unaware that anyone was watching. She wiped the glass display with a soft rag, straightened the local honey $3 sign, and smiled faintly at the picture of her husband. It was a ritual, one that held her together, even as the world around her fell apart. Keanu's gaze lingered longer than he expected. There was something rare about that small store, something that reminded him of places his own family once knew before they disappeared to time and progress. Then he looked at the foreclosure notice taped discreetly on the side window, its bold red stamp half hidden by the fluttering curtain. A shadow crossed his face. He started the engine again, the low growl cutting through the silence. Lydia heard it faintly and looked up, seeing the stranger through the glass. She didn't know who he was, but something about the way he looked back at her made her heart pause. It wasn't pity, it was recognition, a kind of silent understanding between two souls who had both lost something they could never replace. The motorcycle rolled away, disappearing into the horizon. For a long time, Lydia stood at the window, the reflection of the setting sun painting her face in gold. She whispered, "Safe travels," then turned back to her empty store. The day faded into evening. She locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The sound of the bolt sliding into place was heavier than usual. In the quiet, she could almost hear Tom's voice again, telling her not to give up, reminding her of the nights they'd stayed up late, balancing the books, and dreaming of what this little shop could become. She sat on the stool behind the counter, tracing the edge of an old photograph with her fingertip. It was from the store's opening day, decades ago. Balloons, smiles, a small-town mayor cutting a ribbon, Tom's arm around her shoulders. The memory made her eyes glisten. "We made this our home," she whispered. "I'm trying, Tom. I really am." Outside, Main Street was nearly dark. A single lamppost flickered, its light catching the peeling paint of the sign that still read Lydia's Market. The town had quieted long ago, but this place refused to die quietly. Far down the highway, Keanu rode into the deepening dusk, unaware that the woman he'd just met was about to lose everything within a week. But he carried something new in his chest, a thought he couldn't shake, a feeling that would soon bring him back. The night swallowed the road behind him, and the wind carried the faint echo of a bell from Lydia's Market. Soft, distant, and waiting. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Lydia's Market, casting long lines across the counter where dust motes floated lazily in the air. The quiet was familiar now, too familiar. Years ago, the store would have been alive by sunrise neighbors chatting over coffee, kids running in for breakfast candy, Tom laughing behind the register as he fixed someone's old transistor radio. It had been a place where stories began, where everyone felt like family. Back then, the store smelled of bread and laughter. Now, it smelled faintly of stale air and memory. Lydia swept the wooden floor slowly, pausing when the broom brushed against a spot near the back counter, Tom's corner. His old tool chest still sat there, rusted shut but untouched. She never had the heart to move it. That's where he used to spend his afternoons fixing radios, toasters, or whatever a customer brought in with hope instead of instructions. He'd say, "You don't throw things away just because they're broken. You fix them." It was his philosophy for everything: machines, friendships, even life. Lydia smiled faintly, whispering the words to herself, as if reciting a prayer. But time hadn't been kind. When Tom passed from heart failure 5 years ago, the heartbeat of the market went with him. Customers tried to keep coming at first, out of loyalty, but big chain stores opened 20 miles away, offering cheaper prices and shiny aisles. Little by little, traffic thinned. The laughter faded. The store that once connected the community began to vanish into silence. Still, Lydia kept opening every morning. She couldn't stop. This place wasn't just a business, it was her husband's spirit, the last piece of him she could touch. Every shelf she stocked, every jar she labeled by hand, felt like keeping him alive a little longer. When bills piled up, she used what she had. Then she borrowed against the building to pay Tom's hospital costs, believing she'd recover once she caught her footing. But the customers never came back, and the debt never went away. Each month felt like climbing a steeper hill. As she counted the day's register, barely $42, she let out a slow breath and folded the receipt. Outside, a pickup truck rumbled past without stopping. She glanced through the window, watching dust trail behind it, then turned her gaze toward Tom's photograph taped above the counter. "I'm still here," she murmured, still trying. The photo's edges were curling, but the smile in it hadn't dimmed. She imagined him saying what he always did when things got rough. "Integrity doesn't go on sale." She smiled through her tears. "You'd say that now, wouldn't you?" Just then, the doorbell jingled softly. A familiar figure stepped in: Mr. Graham, the old farmer from down the road. He took off his hat and nodded. "Morning, Lydia." Her smile brightened slightly. "Morning, George. You're up early." "Cows don't wait for daylight," he chuckled. "Thought I'd stop in for coffee before the day gets too hot." Lydia poured a cup of coffee from the old percolator that sputtered in protest but still did its job. The aroma filled the air, warm and comforting. Mr. Graham took a seat near the window, glancing around the nearly empty shelves. He tried not to comment, but his eyes softened with concern. "Looks quieter than usual," he said finally. Lydia nodded, setting the cup in front of him. "It's been quieter for a long time. Guess folks have everything they need over at that new market in Mesa Springs." Mr. Graham stirred his coffee. "You know, those chain stores don't know a thing about people. They know prices, not hearts. This place, this is where people used to come just to feel seen." She smiled faintly. "That's kind of you to say. But hearts don't pay the mortgage." There was a silence between them, gentle but heavy. Mr. Graham reached into his pocket and slid a folded envelope across the counter. "I've been meaning to give you this. A little something to help with the bills. Don't make a fuss." Lydia looked down at the envelope as if it were something fragile. "George," she said softly, "I can't take that." He waved a hand. "It's not charity. You've been feeding this town for 30 years, one way or another. Consider it a return on investment." Her voice grew tender but firm. "I appreciate it, truly. But this store has to stand on its own, or it doesn't stand for anything. Tom used to say that." Mr. Graham sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You're as stubborn as that man ever was." Lydia smiled again, this time with warmth. "That's the only reason this place is still here." He chuckled. "Well, don't let that stubbornness cost you your home. I heard the bank's been sniffing around again." Lydia didn't answer. Her silence said enough. She turned toward the shelves, busying her hands with rearranging canned peaches. "They'll do what they have to do," she said quietly. "I'll keep doing what I have to." "Mr." Graham sipped his coffee, then stood and placed his hat back on. "You ever need help? You know where to find me." She nodded. "I know, George. Thank you." As he walked out, the bell chimed softly. Lydia stood by the counter, staring after him. She looked at the untouched envelope he'd left behind, then picked it up and tucked it into the register without opening it. Maybe someday, if things got desperate enough, but not today. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, touching the old photos that lined the wall. Kids from the neighborhood, veterans who'd come home, families gathered for summer fairs. Every picture told a story of the store's past. Lydia brushed her fingers against one photo of her and Tom standing under the newly hung sign. "We built this to last," she whispered. "And I'll keep believing it can." Outside, a faint rumble of an engine stirred in the distance, a motorcycle approaching from the far road. The sound of the motorcycle grew louder as it wound through the dusty road leading into town. Lydia didn't look up right away. She had grown used to the rare visitor delivery men, lost travelers, or locals stopping for gas. Still, something about that low, steady hum made her pause for a moment, broom in hand, listening. Then it faded again, leaving only the soft creak of the store's wooden beams and the sigh of the desert wind. She turned her attention back to her work, dusting the display by the front counter. Her reflection caught in the glass-lined face, tired eyes, and the kind of quiet grace that comes only from years of endurance. She didn't see defeat there, only weariness mixed with a stubborn kind of faith. She had always believed that good things came to those who held on long enough. Behind her, the radio crackled faintly, playing a country song from the local station. The tune carried memories of Tom humming along while fixing old radios in the back. She looked toward the corner where his workbench still stood, scattered with his tools just as he left them. She hadn't touched a thing. His handwriting still marked the small wooden drawers, screws, wire, fuses, hope. That last one always made her laugh. He had carved it as a joke, but now it felt like a message from another world. Lydia's gaze drifted toward the old ledger, resting near the register. She opened it to the most recent page and sighed. The numbers didn't lie. Sales were down again. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote the day's total, $32 and change. She had learned to make do with little, but there was no denying what was coming. The bank had given her 1 week. After that, the building would be repossessed. She told herself she'd find a way, that miracles still happened. But each night, she went home to silence. No footsteps, no laughter. No Tom reassuring her that everything would be all right. The house felt as hollow as the aisles of her store. The bell above the door rang suddenly, and she looked up with the same practiced smile. It was just a teenage boy from down the street, holding a handful of coins. "Hey, Mrs. Monroe," he said shyly. "Can I still get a soda on credit? Dad's check comes Friday." She nodded, without hesitation. "Of course, Jimmy. You tell your dad I said hello." The boy grinned, grabbed a bottle, and hurried out with a cheerful wave. Lydia wrote his name in the small notebook by the register labeled Running Tabs. It was nearly full now. She looked at it for a long time, her heart tightening. Tom would have done the same. He believed people always came through in the end. She hoped he was right. Outside, the wind stirred again, carrying the faint echo of that same motorcycle hum, this time closer, steadier. Lydia lifted her eyes toward the window, unaware that fate was already turning back toward her door. The late afternoon sun painted the small Arizona town in deep shades of amber and gold. The road shimmered with heat, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A lone figure on a black motorcycle slowed as he approached the intersection near Lydia's Market. Keanu Reeves had been riding since dawn, tracing a quiet route through forgotten towns, looking for peace away from the noise of Los Angeles. He wasn't searching for anything in particular that day, just a place to stop, breathe, and remember that the world still had corners untouched by fame or chaos. He parked his bike beside the old lamppost out front. The building before him looked like something frozen in time. Faded green trim, a peeling wooden sign, and windows cluttered with handwritten flyers and dusty mason jars. He could smell something faintly sweet, jam, maybe, or fresh bread that had been baked earlier that morning. There was warmth even in its wear. The bell above the door chimed softly when he stepped inside. The cool air inside felt like stepping into another world. Lydia looked up from behind the counter, her familiar gentle smile appearing the same way it had for every customer, whether they came in once or 100 times. "Afternoon," she greeted, wiping her hands on a towel. "You look like you've been riding a while." Keanu nodded, setting his gloves on the counter. "A long road behind me, and probably a longer one ahead." Her smile widened a little. "That sounds like life itself." He looked around the small shop, taking it in quietly. Every shelf told a story. There were jars labeled with small notes written in careful cursive. "Made with love by local kids." "Homemade honey from the Graham farm." "Pay later if you must." The last one caught his attention. He ran his fingers along the label, wondering who would write something so trusting in a world that rarely gave anything for free. Lydia watched him glance around with quiet appreciation. "It's not much," she said softly, "but I try to keep it warm. It's more than most places do," he replied. His voice carried a sincerity that made her pause. He walked toward the small counter where an old coffee machine sat unused. "Any chance you've got a cup of coffee for the road?" Lydia sighed, her smile dimming. "I wish." The machine gave out a few weeks ago, and the repair guy stopped coming. "I've been saving up to replace it, but it's not exactly top of the list right now." She opened the cooler and pulled out a glass bottle of soda instead. "This one's on the house," she said. "Not as strong as coffee, but it's cold." Keanu shook his head, reaching for his wallet. "No such thing as free work. You should take it." Lydia smiled again, a quiet firmness in her tone. "Then how about this, you pay, if you promise to come back one day for the coffee I owe you?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Deal." Lydia placed the soda on the counter, bottle cool against her fingertips. Keanu reached for his wallet, pulling out a few bills, but as he handed them over, he slipped an extra 20 into the small glass jar near the register. It was half full of coins and folded ones, a quiet symbol of kindness from strangers passing through. Lydia noticed the motion immediately. She shook her head and pushed the bill back toward him. "No tips," she said gently. "I don't take them." He looked at her, puzzled. "Why not? You've got a good place here. People should show appreciation." She gave a faint, tired smile. "I don't need tips. I just need someone to believe that a small store still has meaning." Her words hung in the air like a prayer. Keanu stopped mid-motion, his gaze locking on her. There was something in her tone, steady but cracked with quiet sorrow, that struck him deeper than she could have imagined. He studied her face closely for a moment. The lines etched along her cheeks told stories of long days and sleepless nights. But there was grace in them. Strength, too. She wasn't defeated. She was simply carrying more than anyone should have to carry alone. "What makes you believe it still does?" he asked softly. Lydia glanced toward the photo on the wall, her and Tom, smiling under the Lydia's Market sign decades ago. Because people still need places that remember them, where names matter more than numbers, where you can walk in and feel seen. I think the world forgets how important that is. He nodded slowly. You might be right about that. The clock ticked quietly behind them. Keanu looked around again, noticing more details, the little children's drawings taped near the register, a jar labeled "Community Fund for Whoever Needs It Next," and a framed note written in faded pen. "Integrity doesn't go on sale." "That one," he said, pointing to the note. "That's a good motto." Lydia smiled, a spark of warmth breaking through her weariness. "Tom wrote that. My late husband. He said it the day we opened. And even when things got hard, he'd repeat it, just to make me laugh. I keep it there, so I don't forget why we started." Keanu felt something shift inside him. There was a kind of courage in this woman that he rarely saw anymore, the kind that asked for no recognition, only the chance to keep something pure alive. He placed the bottle cap on the counter and said quietly, "He sounds like someone worth remembering." Lydia nodded, her eyes glistening for a brief moment. He was. Outside, a warm gust of wind rattled the old sign against the window. Keanu could feel the weight of silence returning between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that comes when words have already said enough. He took his soda and said, "Thank you. I'll be back for that coffee." She smiled softly. "I'll hold you to it." Keanu stepped out into the fading afternoon light, the bell above the door jingling softly behind him. The warmth of the desert sun met his face again as he walked toward his motorcycle, soda bottle in hand. He turned the cap slowly, listening to the faint fizz as the carbonation released, and took a sip. It wasn't coffee, but it was honest, cold, sweet, and simple. Somehow, it fit the place perfectly. He leaned against his bike for a moment, staring back through the glass window. Inside, Lydia moved slowly behind the counter, organizing the shelves again, one can at a time. Her motions were deliberate, almost meditative, like someone fighting to keep order in a world that refused to cooperate. She wasn't just running a store, she was holding on to a memory, brick by brick, shelf by shelf. Keanu's eyes lingered on her for longer than he meant to. There was something about the quiet strength she carried that struck him deeply. He'd seen people break under less actors, executives, friends who'd lost purpose once success faded. But here she was, still standing, still believing that something small and human could matter in a world that seemed to have forgotten both. He looked down at his hands, then at the words he'd read earlier. That single phrase kept replaying in his mind. It wasn't just generosity. It was faith. Faith that people would come back. Faith that kindness still had value. He thought of the places he'd known in his life. The glamorous studios, the bright red carpets, the cold faces behind business suits. None of them had felt like Lydia's Market. None of them had felt real. A breeze picked up, carrying the smell of dust and dried sage. The rusted metal sign above the door creaked softly. He could hear the faint hum of the radio inside again, a gentle song leaking through the crack in the door. Lydia was humming along. Something about that sound, fragile, almost breaking, made him hesitate before climbing onto his bike. He glanced at the window one last time. She was still there, placing a loaf of bread on the shelf, unaware that anyone was watching. For reasons he couldn't explain, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small note he often kept for himself when the world grew too heavy. On one side, he wrote 3 simple words: "Keep believing, always." He folded it once and slipped it under the jar of local honey on the outdoor display table by the window. Then he swung his leg over the bike, started the engine, and rode away. The sound echoed down Main Street, fading slowly into the desert air. Inside, Lydia paused for a moment, hearing the engine trail off. She looked up from her work, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Safe travels, stranger." Neither of them knew it yet, but their paths had just intertwined in a way that would change both of their lives forever. The desert sky was turning purple when Keanu pulled into the small roadside diner a few miles from Lydia's market. A neon sign flickered above the door, buzzing faintly in the heat. Rosie's Grill. The parking lot was mostly empty except for 2 pickup trucks and a dusty sedan. The kind of place where the coffee was strong and everyone knew everyone else's business. He stepped inside, brushing the dust from his jacket. The smell of fried onions and coffee filled the air. Country music hummed quietly from an old jukebox in the corner. A few locals sat in a booth near the window, chatting softly between bites of pie. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a name tag that read Rosie, greeted him with a tired smile. "Evenin', stranger. Coffee?" "Please," Keanu replied, settling onto a stool at the counter. He liked places like this, quiet, unpretentious, honest. Rosie poured a steaming cup and slid it toward him. "Haven't seen you around before. Passing through?" "Just riding," he said simply. "Stopped at the little grocery down the road earlier. Lydia's Market." Rosie's expression softened immediately. "You met Lydia?" she said, almost fondly. "She's one of the good ones. That woman's got a heart too big for her own good." The men at the nearby booth turned toward the counter, picking up on the mention. "Talking about Lydia Monroe?" one of them asked. He was gray-haired, with deep lines etched into his sunburned face. "She's been keeping that store alive longer than anyone thought possible." Rosie nodded. "Barely hanging on, though. The bank's been after her for months. Poor thing. Can't catch a break." Keanu stirred his coffee slowly, listening more than speaking. "She said something earlier that stuck with me," he murmured. "She said she just needed someone to believe that a small store still has meaning." The old man gave a low whistle. "That sounds like her. Always talking about community and heart. She used to run credit tabs for half the town back in the day. Let kids grab a soda or chips, even when they didn't have the money. She said, no one should ever feel embarrassed for being broke." A woman in the next booth leaned over. "And don't forget what she did during that bad winter 3 years ago," she added. "She gave out groceries to families who couldn't get out to the big stores, paid for half of it out of her own pocket. Didn't tell a soul. We only found out when she had to sell her truck to keep the store going." Rosie poured another round of coffee for the group. "She's too kind for her own good," she said softly. "That's why she's drowning in debt now. The world isn't built for people like her anymore." Keanu's eyes darkened slightly as he set his spoon down. "How much does she owe?" he asked quietly. No one spoke for a moment. Finally, the old man sighed. "Heard. It's over 30 grand, maybe more." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the jukebox seemed to fade into the background. Keanu looked down into his coffee, the dark surface reflecting the dim diner. Lights. $30,000. To him, it wasn't a fortune, but to a woman like Lydia, it was an impossible mountain. He could see her hands again, the way they trembled slightly when she pushed the money back across the counter, the faint smile when she said she just needed someone to believe. Rosie leaned her elbows on the counter, lowering her voice. "She used to come in here every Friday after closing. Ordered 1 slice of pie. Sat right there at that corner booth. Always left the exact amount, no tip. Said she couldn't afford extras anymore." The old man sighed. Her husband built that store with his bare hands. After he passed, she kept it going just to honor him. Folks tried to help her, but she wouldn't take a dime she didn't earn. Said charity took away dignity. She used to send care packages to the veterans shelter, the woman in the booth added. Did it for years, even when she couldn't afford it. Said her husband served once and came home with nothing but kindness to give. Another man, sitting alone near the door, chimed in. She's been feeding that stray dog out behind the store for months. Everyone calls him Buddy. Half the town swears that dog guards the place at night. She says he's her last regular customer. A soft laugh rippled through the diner, but it was tinged with sadness. These were stories about someone who gave everything and asked for nothing. Keanu listened, eyes distant, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. He finally spoke. It sounds like she's been holding that town together for years. Rosie nodded. Yeah, but you know how it goes. The world moves on, and the ones who care get left behind. She hesitated before adding, the bank's got no mercy. They'll take that place apart piece by piece, if they have to. Keanu's jaw tightened. And nobody's tried to step in? Oh, people have, the old man replied. But it's a lot of money for a small town like this. Everyone's barely making it themselves. We help with groceries now and then. But a debt like that? It's too big for any of us. The room grew quiet again. Keanu finished his coffee, setting the cup down slowly. People like her shouldn't disappear, he said under his breath. The tone of his voice made Rosie look up. There was something steady in his expression, not just sympathy, but purpose. Rosie gave a faint smile, unsure what he meant, but moved by how he said it. You've got a good heart, stranger. He gave a small nod. Just think, everyone deserves a chance to breathe. Outside, the desert wind howled softly against the windows, carrying the weight of his words into the night. Keanu stepped out of the diner, the screen door creaking behind him. The night air was cooler now, heavy with the scent of desert sage. He paused under the flickering neon sign, pulling his jacket tighter as the sound of crickets filled the silence. In the distance, the faint hum of the highway stretched endlessly into the dark. For a long moment, he just stood there, thinking about the woman in the small store, the way she smiled, despite the storm quietly closing in on her life. He climbed onto his motorcycle but didn't start the engine right away. He glanced at the diner window. Inside, Rosie was laughing with the old man and wiping down the counter, a small community holding itself together in the middle of nowhere. It reminded him of what Lydia had said. A small store still has meaning. He had brushed it off at first as sentimentality, but now, after hearing their stories, it hit him harder. She wasn't just keeping a store alive. She was keeping people connected to something they no longer knew how to value. He finally rode back toward town, the road lit only by the pale glow of his headlight. 10 minutes later, he reached a small roadside motel, the kind with flickering signs and a row of identical doors. The manager handed him a key without a word. Inside, the room was quiet, almost sterile. Beige walls, a single chair by the window, and a hum from the old air conditioner in the corner. Keanu sat down by the window and opened his laptop. He wasn't sure why at first, but his fingers typed Lydia's Market, Arizona into the search bar. Nothing came up except a few old business listings and a faded photo. From years ago, Lydia and her husband standing outside the newly opened shop, their smiles wide, their eyes bright with hope. He stared at it for a long time. He then searched Small Town Store Foreclosures 2025 and scrolled through pages of articles. One headline read, Over 10,000 family-owned stores lost to debt this year alone. Another said, The Vanishing Heart of America. When small towns lose their last store, he leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples. The numbers didn't shock him, but they angered him quietly. Behind every statistic was someone like Lydia, someone trying to hold on to the last piece of a shared past. He looked out the window at the empty parking lot, the stars glittering faintly beyond the orange motel lights. A stray dog crossed the road, limping slightly, stopping to sniff a paper bag before disappearing into the shadows. Keanu's reflection in the window looked back at him, tired but thoughtful. He whispered to himself, "If good people like her fade away, what's left of us?" He closed his laptop and turned off the lamp, but sleep didn't come easily. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the motel walls like a quiet reminder that he'd seen something today he couldn't just forget. The morning sun spilled over the horizon, painting the small town in soft gold. Lydia unlocked the door to her store as she did every day, the creak of the hinges greeting her like an old friend. She swept the dust from the front step and straightened the open sign, though she knew only a handful of people might come by. The quiet had become her new rhythm. She flicked on the lights and walked behind the counter. The first thing she noticed was the envelope on the register, a crisp white one with the bank's logo stamped across the top. Her heart sank. She didn't have to open it to know what it said. Still, she tore it open, her hands trembling. The words blurred for a moment, but she read enough to understand. The extension she had begged for had been denied. The loan officer would be arriving that morning to finalize the foreclosure notice. She sat on the stool, clutching the letter. For a moment, she let the silence wrap around her. Then she took a deep breath and forced herself to stand. "Not today," she whispered. "I'll keep fighting one more day." Around 9 o'clock, a sleek gray sedan pulled up outside. Mr. Colby stepped out in his dark suit, briefcase in hand, the morning sun glinting off his glasses. He walked toward the store with a professional stiffness that said everything before he even spoke. Lydia met him at the door with a polite nod. "Morning, Mr. Colby." He gave a tight smile. "Mrs. Monroe, I wish this visit were under better circumstances." "Don't we all?" she replied, trying to keep her tone steady. He followed her inside, pulling a set of papers from his briefcase. "The bank has reviewed your case again. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of the extension period. Unless payment in full is received by the end of next week, the property will be reclaimed by the bank." "I'm truly sorry." Lydia tried to find her voice. "There must be something we can do. Another month, even 2 weeks, just a little. Time to bring things current. I've been talking to suppliers, trying to arrange some new inventory. If I can just—" Her words broke off. She could hear the tremor in her voice, and she hated it. Mr. Colby looked uncomfortable, but didn't waver. "It's not my decision. I've done all I can on my end. The paperwork is final." He set the documents on the counter and gestured toward the dotted line. "You'll need to sign this acknowledgement form for the record." Lydia looked down at the paper. Her hand hovered over it, then fell away. "I'll sign it later," she said quietly. Mr. Colby nodded, gave her a sympathetic glance, and stepped out, leaving the store in its heavy silence again. The door shut, and Lydia leaned against the counter, her breath shallow, her eyes burning with the tears she refused to let fall. The store was still when the gray sedan disappeared down Main Street. Lydia stood behind the counter for a long time, staring at the papers Mr. Colby had left behind. Her name sat at the bottom of the page, waiting for her signature like a sentence waiting to be sealed. She folded the papers carefully and tucked them beneath the register, as if hiding them could buy her time. She exhaled slowly, wiped her hands on her apron, and forced herself back to work. There were boxes of canned goods in the back room she needed to sort. The delivery driver had been kind enough to drop them off early, though she hadn't yet figured out how she would pay the invoice. She lifted one of the boxes, heavier than she expected, and staggered toward the front shelf. The bell above the door jingled. She didn't look up right away. "Be with you in a second," she called, struggling to set the box down. A pair of boots appeared beside her, and a calm voice said, "Here, let me help." She turned, startled, to see the same man from days ago, the traveler, with kind eyes and dusty jeans. He bent easily, lifting the box and placing it on the counter as though it weighed nothing. Lydia blinked, catching her breath. "Well, if it isn't my coffee debt customer," she said with a faint smile. Keanu smiled softly. Guess I couldn't stay away from the best soda in Arizona. The small attempt at humor earned a real laugh from her. The first in days. I should charge you double then. He noticed her hand trembling slightly as she brushed her hair back. Her face looked pale, tired, the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. You all right? He asked gently. She hesitated before answering. Just another day in paradise, she said, forcing a light tone. But when she turned away to grab a rag, he saw her swipe at her cheek quickly with her sleeve. He said nothing. He just stood there for a moment, watching her steady herself. He could see it, the quiet pride she carried, the determination not to crumble in front of anyone. It reminded him of his own mother, how she used to hide her worries behind a steady smile. Need a hand with the rest? He asked, motioning toward the back room. She shook her head. No, you've done plenty. I can manage. But when she tried to lift the next box, he was already beside her again. It's okay, he said softly. Sometimes managing means letting someone help. Their eyes met briefly, and for a split second she saw something in his gaze, a steadiness, a kindness she hadn't felt directed at her in a long time. She smiled faintly. Thanks, traveler. You've got kind eyes. He nodded once, setting the box down gently. And you've got a good heart. When the last box was stacked neatly by the counter, Lydia wiped her hands and leaned against the wall. The quiet between them was easy this time. Keanu stood a few feet away, studying the small details of the store. Again, the faded photo of Lydia and Tom, the hand-painted community fund jar, the shelf of jams labeled in careful handwriting. He picked one up, reading the tag. Strawberry jam, made with love. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a date from 2 years earlier. The label was slightly crooked, as though applied in a hurry, but it made him smile. Lydia noticed his interest. Those were Tom's favorite, she said softly. He used to say the smell of strawberries meant the world wasn't giving up just yet. Keanu turned the jar in his hands, seeing more than jam. He saw effort, endurance, a story sealed in glass. He reached into his wallet and set a few bills on the counter. I'll take one. She started to protest. You don't have to. I want to, he said gently, cutting her off. Consider it prepayment for the coffee you still owe me. Her eyes warmed a little at that. All right, traveler, but you better come back to claim it. He nodded, sliding the jar into his bag. She turned to straighten the shelves again, and for a moment he hesitated. Something told him he couldn't leave without saying something, without leaving something behind. When she wasn't looking, he pulled a small folded scrap of paper from his pocket. On it, he wrote a simple message. Keep going. The world still needs places like this. He placed it under the jar display near the register, tucking it carefully so it wouldn't blow away. Then he walked toward the door. The bell jingled softly as he paused on the threshold. Take care, Lydia, he said. She looked up, surprised. You remembered my name? He smiled faintly. Hard to forget a place like this. She watched him step outside, the sun catching the edge of his jacket as he walked toward his motorcycle. For a few seconds she stood there, hands resting on the counter, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet sense of being seen. When the sound of his bike faded down the road, she turned back to the shelves. That's when she noticed the slip of paper peeking from under the jar display. She unfolded it slowly, her breath catching as she read the words. Her lips trembled, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. She pressed the note to her chest, whispering softly, maybe the world hasn't forgotten after all. Outside, the wind picked up, fluttering the flag above the store. The morning light poured through the window, landing on the counter where the note had been left, its message still glowing faintly in the sun. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of faded asphalt cutting through the Arizona desert. The sun was setting, throwing streaks of crimson and violet across the horizon. Keanu rode in silence, the roar of the engine blending with his thoughts. Normally, the open road brought him peace. But tonight, every mile only deepened the ache that had begun back at Lydia's market. He could still see her standing behind that counter, smiling through exhaustion, pretending everything was fine, thanking him as if kindness was something rare and borrowed. He had met hundreds of people during his travels, but there was something different about her. She carried quiet dignity, the kind that didn't demand attention, the kind that only showed its strength when no one was looking. He pulled off the highway and parked his motorcycle by a rest stop. The air was cooler here, the desert wind sharp against his face. He sat on a stone bench and unscrewed the cap from his water bottle, but his hands didn't move to drink. His thoughts were somewhere else entirely inside that little store, where a woman kept sweeping dust from floors no one walked on anymore. He took out his phone and stared at it for a long time. He didn't plan to get involved. He never did. But he couldn't shake the memory of her words. "I just need someone to believe that a small store still has meaning." It echoed in his mind, refusing to fade. Finally, he dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. "Good evening, Mr. Reeves. This is Mark from your financial office. How can I help you?" Keanu hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "Mark, I need a favor." "Of course," the man replied. "What do you need?" He took a deep breath. How hard would it be to clear a small business debt anonymously? There was a pause. "That depends on the circumstances. Can you give me a little more detail?" "It's a family-owned store in Arizona. The owner's in trouble. I don't want her to know it's me. Just make it disappear if possible." Mark's tone shifted slightly. The tone of someone realizing this wasn't business, it was personal. "We can do it through one of your existing trusts. You'd remain completely anonymous. But I'll need to know the approximate amount." Keanu stared into the distance, his voice quiet. 30 to 40,000, maybe. Make sure the paperwork doesn't lead back to me." Mark nodded, already typing. "Understood. Do you want the payment listed under one of your existing charities?" Keanu thought for a moment. "No. Create something new, something that sounds like hope. Call it the Phoenix Hope Foundation." There was silence again. Then Mark said, "That's fitting." Rising from the ashes, Keanu exhaled slowly. "Exactly." Mark began taking notes as the line went quiet for a few seconds. Keanu stood near his motorcycle, phone pressed to his ear, staring out at the horizon where the last streaks of daylight melted into deep blue. "Do you want me to have legal draft the paperwork tonight?" Mark asked. "Yes," Keanu replied. "Make it clean, no trace. She doesn't need to know who or why. Just make sure the bank clears her record and that she keeps the property free and clear." "We can do that," Mark said. "I'll contact the regional branch manager directly. I'll file it under community renewal. We've done similar for veterans programs and flood victims. It'll go unnoticed." "Good," Keanu murmured. "Make it quiet." He rubbed his eyes and sat back down on the bench, the phone warm against his ear. "You ever see someone fighting for something everyone else gave up on?" he asked suddenly. Mark paused. "I've seen people hold on longer than they should, yes." Keanu smiled faintly. "This woman's one of them. Her store isn't just a place, it's the center of her world. It's where people still matter more than profit." Mark's tone softened. "You sound like you've been there before." "I have," Keanu said quietly. "When you've lost enough people, you start to recognize those who keep the lights on for others. She's one of those." "I'll handle it personally," Mark said after a pause. "Give me a week. Once the transfer clears, she'll get a letter from the bank confirming her debt is resolved." "Thank you," Keanu replied. "And Mark, don't mention my name to anyone." "Of course," Mark assured. "Your secret's safe. But if I may ask, why not tell her? People like that deserve to know when someone believes in them." Keanu looked up at the stars, their cold light glittering against the vast sky. "Because belief isn't a gift you hand out," he said softly. "It's something they have to find again on their own." She already believes she just needed proof the world still does too. There was silence on the line before Mark said, "Understood. You'll get confirmation once it's done." They hung up, and Keanu sat there for a while, letting the quiet fill in around him. The desert stretched endlessly, and the hum of insects replaced the sound of his thoughts. He finally stood, sliding his phone back into his pocket. As he climbed onto his motorcycle, he whispered, almost to himself, "Hang in there, Lydia. Help's on the way." He started the engine and rode off into the night, the headlight carving a narrow path through the darkness. Behind him, the wind swept across the open plain, carrying away the last traces of the conversation, except for the promise it left behind. 3 days later, the paperwork moved through quiet channels. No headlines, no signatures in bold print. Just a few anonymous transactions buried among hundreds of charitable filings. Mark worked quickly, coordinating with the local branch manager of the Arizona bank. The payment came from the newly registered Phoenix Hope Foundation, a name that carried no celebrity ties, no obvious owner, and no traceable record linking it to Keanu Reeves. The debt was cleared in full. Interest, late fees, and penalties, every cent erased. The documents were stamped, sealed, and archived. The next step was simple: a standard letter to the debtor confirming settlement. Back in California, Keanu sat by his window overlooking the quiet Los Angeles skyline. It was late, the city below flickering with lights that never slept. He held a mug of black coffee, thinking about that dusty little play, market miles away. He didn't know if Lydia had opened her doors that morning or if she'd been too tired to try again, but he hoped she had. Mark's message arrived just after midnight. "All done. The property is debt-free. She'll be notified within 48 hours. Thank you for trusting me with this." Keanu read it twice, then set his phone down. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked out at the distant lights and smiled faintly, almost wistfully. "Good," he whispered. "Let her think it was fate." He turned off his lamp and sat in the dark, letting the moment settle. He didn't feel pride or satisfaction, just a quiet calm, the kind that comes from knowing something right had been done with no need for recognition. A week later, Lydia walked into her store carrying her morning coffee and a heavy heart. The past days had been a blur of trying to fill shelves, contacting old suppliers, and ignoring the dread that waited behind the counter in the form of unpaid bills. The envelope from the bank lay unopened where she had left it days earlier. She sighed, picked it up, and tore it open. Her eyes scanned the first lines, and she froze. "We are pleased to inform you that your outstanding loan has been paid in full by a third-party donor through the Phoenix Hope Foundation. Your property is now free of debt." The paper trembled in her hands. She read it again, unable to believe it. The letter didn't list a name. There was no note, no clue, just a single signature from the bank manager confirming payment. She sank into her chair, tears spilling freely. The same words repeated in her head like a prayer. Paid in full. Somewhere far away, on another quiet highway, Keanu was back on his motorcycle, the desert wind tugging at his jacket. He didn't look back, didn't tell a soul, and didn't need to. The world would never know. But for one small store, in a forgotten town, the lights would stay on, because one stranger had believed. The days drifted by quietly, in the small town of Dry Creek. Lydia kept opening her store every morning, sweeping the same steps, and greeting the same few loyal customers. But even as she smiled, there was a heaviness behind her eyes. Every time she looked at the counter, she saw the envelope from the bank that had arrived weeks earlier, still unopened. She had convinced herself it was just another warning, another notice pushing her closer to losing everything. That morning, the postman knocked on her door again. "Got something for you, Mrs. Monroe," he said, handing her another envelope with the same official logo. "Looks important." Her heart sank. She thanked him softly and set the envelope on the counter. The morning light poured through the window, illuminating the neat handwriting and the embossed seal. She stared at it for a long time before finally tearing it open. The first line made her breath catch. "We are pleased to inform you that your outstanding loan has, quote, been paid in full by a third-party donor." Her trembling hands clutched the page tighter as the room seemed to spin around her. "Paid in full." She read on. "The balance on your account has been cleared and your property title restored. The payment was made by the Phoenix Hope Foundation." At the bottom, a small slip of paper was attached, written in careful handwriting. "Keep believing." Her knees gave out, and she sank into the chair behind the counter. The letter fell into her lap as her hands covered her face. For years, she had fought to hold on, to keep the lights on, to believe that one good thing might still happen. And now, when she had nothing left, it had come. Tears streamed freely, silent and unrestrained. She hadn't cried like that since Tom's funeral. The walls around her seemed to soften, as if the store itself could breathe again. The sound of the ceiling fan, the smell of the wood, the faint creak of the shelves, it all felt alive once more. She whispered through the tears, "Tom, we made it. We really made it." For the rest of the morning, she sat there with the letter pressed against her heart. When she finally found the strength to stand, she went outside and flipped the close sign to open. But this time, it wasn't habit. It was hope. Her first customer that day was a young mother with her daughter. Lydia smiled so wide that the woman stopped in surprise. "You look different today," she said. "I am," Lydia replied softly. "It's a new beginning." By the next morning, word had begun to spread through Dry Creek like a warm wind. The news traveled from the post office to the diner, then to the hardware store across town. By noon, everyone seemed to know Lydia Monroe's debt had been paid. The woman who had nearly lost everything suddenly had her store back, and no one knew how. Rosie from the diner was the first to stop by. She walked in carrying a small box of pastries and a smile that could light the room. "Well, look at you," she said, setting the box on the counter. "Half the town's been talking about you all morning." Lydia laughed, still dazed by everything. "I guess good news travels faster than bad." "It's about time," Rosie said. "You've carried this place and this town long enough. Maybe it's the universe finally paying its tab." Lydia shook her head slowly. It wasn't the universe. Someone did this. Someone kind. She glanced at the note again. The one that simply said, "Keep believing." "But I don't even know who." Rosie smiled knowingly. "Maybe you're not supposed to." Throughout the day, more familiar faces stopped by. Mr. Graham came in with his hat in his hands and tears in his eyes. "Heard the news," he said. "I'll be honest, Lydia. I didn't think miracles still happened." She reached across the counter and took his hand. "Neither did I." "You deserve this," he said firmly. "You've helped more people than you'll ever realize." As they spoke, the bell above the door rang again and again. Children came in carrying drawings they'd made, bright crayon pictures of the market, with Lydia smiling behind the counter. They taped them on the wall, where the sunlight hit just right. A few of the veterans from the shelter stopped by too, leaving small envelopes of thanks and notes that simply said, "We remember what you did for us." The once quiet aisles began to hum with laughter again. People who hadn't stepped into the store in years wandered in just to say hello. Some bought jars of jam. Some bought nothing at all, but everyone left with the same feeling. The place felt alive again. By evening, Lydia stood near the front window, watching as a group of teenagers helped repaint her worn-out sign. One of them turned and said, "Mrs. Monroe, you think you'll change the name now that the place is saved?" She smiled softly. "No. This store's always been about believing in what lasts. And names like that, well, they don't change." The kids grinned and went back to painting. their laughter echoing down the street. Lydia turned back inside, the note from the mysterious donor still resting near the register. She traced the words with her fingertips and whispered, "I'll keep believing. I promise." By the weekend, the little town of Dry Creek hadn't been this alive in years. Cars lined the dusty main street. Neighbors stood outside chatting, and the air carried the smell of fresh bread and paint. Someone had organized a small celebration in front of Lydia's market, a way for the community to thank her for never giving up, even when the world seemed to. Lydia protested at first. "You don't need to make a fuss," she told Rosie, who had taken charge of the arrangements. But Rosie only smiled. "You've kept this town's heart beating. It's about time we remind you of that." So Lydia let them. She stood on the wooden porch of her store, watching children hang balloons and banners that read, "Thank you, Lydia." Veterans in their old uniforms leaned against trucks, trading stories about the woman who once fed them when they couldn't afford a meal. Even the mayor, who rarely showed up for local events anymore, came by with a bouquet and a wide grin. "It's good to see this place full again. Dry Creek hasn't felt like a community in a long time. Maybe we needed a reminder." Lydia nodded, her eyes misting. Sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to bring people home. Throughout the day, customers poured in. The register chimed again and again, not because anyone owed her, but because they wanted to give back. Someone left a $100 bill in the tip jar. A few kids brought handmade crafts to sell at the counter. The air buzzed with warmth, laughter, and gratitude. But underneath the celebration lingered a single question, whispered again and again. Who did it? No one could find an answer. The letter had come from the bank, the donor unnamed. A few theories spread quickly. Some said a church group, others thought a wealthy business owner. But one older man sitting at the diner that afternoon shook his head and said, "No, I bet it was that traveler. The quiet one who came through last month on the black motorcycle." Lydia talked about him, said he had kind eyes. The rumor grew like wildfire. Rosie remembered seeing a man like that too. A polite stranger who'd stopped in for coffee before heading toward the highway. Didn't say much, she recalled, but he listened, really listened. By sundown, nearly everyone had heard the story. People began calling him the stranger with kind eyes. Lydia stood by the counter as the last of her customers left for the night. The sun dipped low, turning the windows amber. She looked down at the note again. Keep believing. The tie. Handwriting was simple but careful, written by someone who meant every word. She smiled through her tears and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." Then she flipped off the lights, locked the door, and stood on the front step for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of her revived town. The streetlights glowed softly. The world felt lighter, and for the first time in years, Lydia didn't feel alone. 2 weeks after the celebration, the town of Dry Creek woke to an unexpected sight. 2 vans parked outside Lydia's market, with bold letters painted on their sides, Channel 7 News and Desert Daily Tribune. Reporters with microphones stood near the front door while camera operators adjusted their lenses, waiting for the morning light to hit the storefront just right. The headline was already being drafted: "Mystery Donor Saves Widow's Grocery Store." Lydia stood inside, peeking through the blinds, still in her apron. She had never been on camera in her life, and the idea made her heart race. She took a deep breath, straightened her blouse, and stepped outside. A young reporter with bright eyes and too much energy approached first. "Mrs. Monroe, good morning. Could we ask you a few questions? The whole state's talking about your story." Lydia blinked, caught off guard. "My story?" "Yes, ma'am," the reporter said quickly. "You were about to lose your store, and then, poof, it was saved by an anonymous donor. People are calling it a miracle. Can you tell us what you know?" Lydia smiled nervously. "All I know is that one morning I opened a letter and my debt was gone. I don't know who did it, and maybe I'm not supposed to. Whoever they are, I just want to say thank you. Do you have any idea who it might be? The reporter pressed. Someone local? A charity? Lydia hesitated, then shook her head. No idea at all. But I'll tell you this, it wasn't just money that saved this place. It was faith. Faith that Devonus, someone still cared. The camera lights blinked red as she spoke. The footage aired that same evening, and within 24 hours, the story exploded online. Major networks picked it up, each outlet adding its own dramatic twist. Anonymous angel saves struggling widow. Small-town miracle in Arizona. Comment sections filled with thousands of messages, people praising Lydia's perseverance. Others vowing to support small businesses in her honor. But one headline from a financial blog would soon change everything. Donation to Lydia's Market, linked to Phoenix Hope Foundation Trust, created by Keanu Reeves. The discovery came from a journalist in Los Angeles who specialized in tracing celebrity philanthropy. He had cross-checked tax filings and noticed a newly formed charity that had made only one transaction. A $43,000 payment to the same bank that held Lydia's loan. The revelation hit the internet like wildfire. By the next morning, every major outlet had the fiery, same headline, Keanu Reeves secretly saves small-town shop. Lydia found out when Rosie rushed into the store waving her phone. "Lydia, it's all over the news! Look!" she gasped, handing it over. Lydia stared at the headline, her eyes wide. "Keanu Reeves?" she whispered. "The traveler?" Rosie nodded, grinning in disbelief. "Looks like your stranger with kind eyes wasn't just a traveler after all." Within hours, the quiet town of Dry Creek became the center of a national frenzy. Satellite trucks rolled down Main Street. Journalists camped outside Lydia's Market from sunrise to sunset, hoping to capture a glimpse of the woman whose life had been changed by Keanu Reeves. The once sleepy desert road now buzzed with interviews, cameras, and curious tourists eager to see the famous little shop that Keanu saved. Lydia stood behind the counter, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Reporters crowded the small store, their questions overlapping. "Mrs. Monroe, how did you meet him? Did he ever tell you who he was? What was your reaction when you found out?" She held up her hands, trying to steady her voice. "Please, everyone slow down. I didn't even know it was him until this morning. He came here like any other customer, just a kind stranger. I didn't recognize him. Under that dusty jacket. He paid for a soda and helped me lift a box, that's all." A young reporter stepped forward, microphone trembling in her hand. "So, he never mentioned his name?" Lydia shook her head. "Not once. He didn't want credit, he just wanted to help." She smiled softly, her voice lowering. "He said something I'll never forget. I told him I needed someone to believe that small stores still have meaning. And he looked at me and said, 'I believe they do.'" The crowd went quiet for a moment, moved by the simplicity of her words. That night, her interview aired across national television. Footage of Lydia, speaking humbly, about kindness and community, went viral within hours. People online flooded the comments with praise for Keanu's quiet generosity, calling him the last good man in Hollywood. Meanwhile, Keanu was in Los Angeles, sitting in a modest chair at a press junket for his latest film, when a journalist broke from the usual questions. "Mr. Reeves, are the reports true? Did you anonymously pay off a widow's debt to save her grocery store in Arizona?" He smiled faintly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't plan for anyone to find out," he said quietly. "That store doesn't sell things. It keeps people." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked, but no one spoke for several seconds. He continued softly, "We forget sometimes that small places like that, stores, diners, shops, are what hold towns together. They're where people still talk to each other, still care about one another. I just didn't want to see that disappear." His words were replayed on every major network that night. Talk show hosts quoted them. Newspapers printed them in bold letters. and millions of people shared the clip online. Back in Dry Creek, Lydia watched the broadcast from her kitchen table, her hands clasped under her chin. When Keanu spoke those words, her eyes filled again. She whispered, "He understood." Outside, her porch light glowed softly in the desert night, and the sound of the wind carried faint echoes of laughter from Main Street, where people still gathered at Lydia's market, no longer just a store, but a living symbol of hope. In the weeks that followed the media storm, something extraordinary began to happen. Letters poured into Lydia's market from all over the country. Some came from other small-town shop owners who had faced the same struggles. Others came from people who had seen Keanu's interview and wanted to do something kind in return. Envelopes filled with handwritten notes, donations, and stories arrived every day. One simply read, "For the woman who reminded us that hope still exists." The bank that had once threatened to seize her property sent a letter too, this time offering her a new account and a public apology. A local charity partnered with Lydia to create a small community fund, ensuring no family in Dry Creek would ever go hungry again. Lydia stood behind the counter each morning with tears in her eyes as she opened letters from strangers she would never meet. She felt overwhelmed by the goodness that had suddenly surrounded her little world. She didn't see it as her victory. It belonged to everyone who still believed that kindness mattered. With the support flowing in, she hired a few of the town's teenagers to help rebuild. Together, they cleaned every shelf, painted the walls, and filled the aisles with new stock. The shelves that once stood empty now gleamed with color-fresh produce, jars of jam, handmade soaps, local crafts, and baskets of fruit grown by neighbors. Lydia decided to change one thing about the store. She painted a sign outside, right above the door, in bold white letters that read, "Community starts here." It wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. Each day, more people stopped by, not to buy anything, but to be part of what the store represented. Veterans gathered on the porch for morning coffee. Parents brought their children to show them the place that Keanu Reeves saved. A few even left flowers at the base of the sign, as if honoring something sacred. Lydia watched it all unfold with quiet wonder. She still wore her old apron, still swept the floors herself, and still greeted everyone who walked through the door with the same warmth. When someone tried to call her a hero, she would smile and shake her head. "I didn't do anything special," she'd say. "He didn't save a store. He reminded us who we were." In the back corner near the register, she cleared a small section of wall and began pinning letters, photos, and thank you notes. It became known as the Gratitude Corner. There were pictures of families Lydia had helped years ago, cards from children she'd given candy to, and photos of her and Tom in the early days of the market. At the center of it all, framed neatly, hung the note that started it, the one left by Keanu, under the jar of honey. The paper had faded slightly, but the message remained, "Keep believing." Every time she passed it, Lydia touched the frame and whispered, "I still do." By midsummer, Dry Creek had transformed from a forgotten town into a destination. Travelers from across the country began arriving to see the little grocery store that had become a symbol of hope. Cars with license plates from distant states parked along Main Street, and people lined up to take photos beside the new sign that read, "Community starts here." But Lydia never charged admission, never sold souvenirs, and never once turned the story into profit. When a television crew offered to pay her for an exclusive feature, she politely declined. "This store isn't about money," she told them. "It's about people. The moment I forget that, we lose everything again." Tourists wandered the aisles with quiet reverence, like they were stepping into something sacred. They bought small things, jars of jam, handmade trinkets, postcards, and left with something bigger than what they paid for. Some left donations, others simply left notes of gratitude tucked under the counter. Lydia saved every one. The community around her began to thrive again. A nearby bakery reopened after being closed for years, The old gas station owner, inspired by Lydia's revival, fixed his pumps and reopened as well. Even Rosie's Diner got a fresh coat of paint and a line out the door again. The town that had once been dying now pulsed with life. Each evening, Lydia sat outside on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in deep orange and pink. Sometimes, she'd hear a motorcycle rumbling faintly in the distance and look up, wondering if he might ever come back. She never expected it, but the thought always made her smile. One afternoon, a journalist asked her if she ever wished she could repay Keanu. She shook her head. "There's no debt between us," she said. "He gave me more than money. He gave me a reason to keep believing. And now it's my turn to pass that forward." And she did. She started a small mentorship program for local teens, teaching them how to manage small businesses, balance kindness with responsibility, and keep community values alive. "If you build something with love," she told them, "people will feel it." On weekends, the store became more than a shop. It was a meeting place where people brought baked goods, music, and stories. Families gathered under the shade of the front awning, while children played on the dusty road. The laughter echoed into the evening like it used to long ago. Inside, the shelves gleamed, the air smelled of bread and jam, and the gratitude corner kept growing until it took over half the back wall. In the center, still framed under glass, the note from Keanu remained untouched. People often asked why she never moved it to a safer place. Lydia always answered the same way. "It belongs here," she'd say, her eyes shining. "Right where hope began." And each night before locking up, she'd glance at the note once more and whisper, "Thank you, stranger." Autumn rolled in quietly, painting the desert in deep gold, and faded. Amber. The town of Dry Creek had settled into a new rhythm of life, steady and warm. Lydia's market was thriving, not just as a store but as a gathering place. Locals and travelers alike filled the aisles each day, and the laughter of children spilled into the street. Yet, even amid the joy, Lydia sometimes found herself thinking of the stranger who had changed everything. One crisp morning, she stood by the front window, watching the first leaves drift across Main Street. The sound came softly at first, a low, familiar rumble echoing down the road. Her heart skipped before her mind could name it. A black motorcycle slowed to a stop in front of the store, dust curling around the tires. He was back. Keanu Reeves removed his helmet, shaking out his dark hair, his expression calm as always. He looked at the sign above the store, "Community starts here," and smiled faintly. For a long moment, he stood there, taking it in. The last time he'd seen this place, it had been quiet and half empty. Now, through the glass, he could see life everywhere. Lydia stepped outside, her apron still tied around her waist, her eyes shining with disbelief. For a second, words failed her. She simply smiled and said, "Coffee's on the house this time." He chuckled softly. "You finally fixed the machine?" "Brand new," she said proudly. "And it works better than ever." Inside, the store smelled of baked bread and cinnamon. Keanu sat down at the small table by the window, the same spot where he had stood months before, when he'd slipped that note under a jar of honey. Lydia poured him a cup of coffee and sat across from him. For a few seconds, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The warmth in their silence said everything words couldn't. Finally, Lydia broke the quiet. "I never got the chance to thank you," she said, her voice soft but sure. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You don't need to. You did the hard part." She shook her head, tears beginning to gather. "You believed in something I thought the world forgot. You didn't just save this store, you brought the town back." Keanu's gaze softened. "No," he said gently. "You did. You kept believing, even when there was no reason to. That's what saved it." Her eyes filled completely then, and she reached across the table, her weathered hand resting over his. "Tom would have loved this," she whispered. He smiled at the mention of her husband's name. "I think he already does." Outside the window, two children raced past with paper bags of candy, their laughter rising into the afternoon air. Lydia glanced at them, her smile returning. "It's like the old days again," she said. "Maybe even better." Sometimes you have to lose something to remember why it mattered. They sat together for a while, drinking coffee as the afternoon sun poured through the window. It cast golden light across the wooden floor, illuminating the walls now covered with photos, letters, and drawings. Keanu's eyes drifted toward the gratitude corner. He stood and walked over to it, scanning the colorful collage of lives and memories. There were Polaroids of smiling customers, notes from veterans, handprints of local children, and in the very center framed, carefully, his old note, "Keep believing." He smiled faintly. "You kept it," he said quietly. Lydia joined him, standing at his side. "Of course I did. That note reminded me that people still care. It's why I couldn't give up, even when I didn't know what tomorrow would bring." He looked around the store again, at the shelves filled with life, and the customers chatting by the door. "You built something beautiful," he said. "This isn't just a market anymore. It's a heartbeat." Lydia laughed softly, wiping at her eyes. "A heartbeat," she repeated. "Tom used to call it that too. He said this place was where the town came to breathe." Keanu turned back toward her, his tone calm, but full of warmth. "Then, I guess you brought it back to life." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Maybe we both did." For a few moments, neither spoke. The only sounds were the distant chatter of customers and the soft hum of the radio. There was peace in the quiet, the kind that came only after storms had passed. Lydia walked behind the counter and took out a small box. Inside was a jar of strawberry jam with a new handwritten label, "Made with Gratitude." She handed it to him. "I've been saving this for you. Tom's recipe. The first batch I made after everything turned around." Keanu accepted it, turning the jar slowly in his hands. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I'll make sure it gets the appreciation it deserves." They both laughed quietly at that. Then Lydia's voice softened again. "You know, people come in every day asking about you. Reporters, tourists, strangers. But I tell them the same thing every time, that the story isn't about who saved the store. It's about what it reminded us of." "And what's that?" he asked. "That kindness still has power," she replied. "That one person doing something good can make others do the same." He nodded, clearly moved. "You're right," he said softly. "It's never just one act. It's what grows from it." The bell above the door rang as a breeze drifted through. Outside, the street was full of laughter, the kind of laughter that used to be rare in Dry Creek. Keanu finished the last sip of his coffee and stood. Lydia followed him to the door. "You'll come back again, won't you?" He smiled, slipping on his helmet. "I always find my way back to places that matter." As the motorcycle roared to life and he pulled away, Lydia stood in the doorway, watching him disappear down the same road he'd first arrived on. Her hand pressed lightly against the glass. "He believed," she whispered. "And because he did, so do we." Winter came softly to Dry Creek, wrapping the little town in cool mornings and amber sunsets. Lydia's market had become more than a grocery store. It was a story that wouldn't fade. The tale of the widow, the mysterious stranger, and the miracle that saved a community had traveled far beyond Arizona. One morning, as Lydia flipped her open sign, a small van rolled up bearing a logo she didn't recognize. 3 people stepped out, cameras in hand, wearing warm smiles and soft voices. A woman in her 30s approached first. "Mrs. Monroe? My name's Sarah," she said. "I'm with a documentary series called Kindness That Changed America. We'd love to feature your story. Would you be willing to talk to us?" Lydia blinked in surprise. "A documentary? Oh, I don't know about that," she said nervously. I'm not much for cameras. Sarah smiled gently. It's not really about cameras. It's about people, about how kindness moves through communities. We'd like to show what your store means to others. Lydia hesitated, glancing around at the photos, the laughter, and the life surrounding her. She thought of Keanu's visit, of the note that had started everything. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said softly, "as long as you tell it right." The crew set up quietly, treating the space with care. They filmed the morning routine, Lydia sweeping the porch, greeting neighbors, and serving coffee to old Mr. Graham. They captured the sounds of laughter and the creak of the door, the very heartbeat of the place. Later, they interviewed Lydia near the gratitude corner. The camera rolled as she spoke gently about the months before her miracle, when she nearly lost everything. Her words were simple but powerful. "I thought I was invisible," she said, "but someone saw me. That's what saved me, not money, not fame, just being seen." The crew stayed for 3 days, recording every corner of Dry Creek. They spoke with Rosie at the diner, with the teenagers who worked part-time at the market, and with the veterans who met there for coffee each morning. Each one said nearly the same thing, that Lydia's Market wasn't just a store anymore. It was a symbol. On the final day of filming, Sarah asked Lydia if they could invite Keanu to join the project. Lydia smiled softly. "You can ask him," she said, "but don't be surprised if he says no. He's not one for attention." Still, Sarah reached out through his publicist. To her surprise, Keanu agreed. 2 weeks later, a quiet black car pulled up in front of Lydia's Market. The crew gathered outside as Keanu stepped out, dressed simply, his familiar, calm presence settling the air around him. Lydia stepped out to greet him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You came back," she said warmly. He smiled. "You said the coffee was better now. I thought I should see for myself." They both laughed softly as the cameras rolled. The crew filmed for hours that day, capturing the quiet grace between two people whose lives had crossed by fate. Inside the market, Keanu and Lydia sat at the same table by the window, coffee cups steaming between them. There were no scripts, no retakes, just an honest conversation about what had happened and what it meant. Sarah kept her voice low as she guided the discussion. "Mr. Reeves," she asked, "why did you choose to help anonymously?" Keanu looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. "Because kindness doesn't need a spotlight," he said simply. "The moment you do it for recognition, it stops being kindness." I didn't save her store. I just gave the universe a small nudge. Lydia smiled gently, shaking her head. "He's too humble." That nudge changed everything. This town was fading. Now, people come here from everywhere, not to see me, but to remember what generosity looks like. The cameras captured her words, her eyes glistening with pride and gratitude. Then, Sarah asked another question. "What do you think people should take away from your story?" Lydia turned toward the camera. "That you don't need to be famous or rich to help someone," she said. "All it takes is seeing the person in front of you and believing they matter." Keanu nodded in quiet agreement. She's right. Every act of kindness keeps a piece of the world alive. When the filming wrapped, Sarah approached Keanu with a clipboard. "We're incredibly grateful for your time," she said. "The studio insists we compensate you for your appearance, even if it's symbolic." He smiled, shaking his head. "No payment. I'm just a customer." She blinked. "Are you sure?" "Completely," he said. "If you want to do something, donate whatever you plan to pay me to a small town store that needs it. There's always another Dry Creek somewhere." Sarah nodded, visibly moved. She later told her crew, "This is the easiest story I've ever filmed. You can't direct goodness like that, you just capture it." The documentary aired nationwide 3 months later. Its title was The Store That Kept Believing. The first scene showed Lydia opening her doors at sunrise, followed by Keanu's line, That store doesn't sell things. It keeps people. Audiences across the country were captivated. News outlets called it a love letter to America's forgotten heart. Viewers wrote in from every state, sharing stories of their own small-town heroes. In the months that followed, hundreds of small acts of generosity began to appear anonymous. Donations to family businesses, communities coming together to rescue local shops, and new volunteer groups calling themselves Hope Circles. Lydia's Market became a symbol of a national movement. Tourists still came, but now they brought stories of their own towns being reborn. One woman from Kansas told Lydia, "We started our own Community Starts Here store after watching you." Each time Lydia heard something like that, she thought of Keanu's words. It's never just one act. It's what grows from it. And every evening, as she locked up and passed the framed note, keep believing she knew that kindness, once planted, would keep growing long after cameras stopped rolling. The night the store that kept believing aired, something extraordinary began to unfold across America. Within hours, social media was flooded with the same two hashtags, #KeepBelieving and #Small Stores Matter. Viewers who had never met Lydia or Keanu shared photos of small-town shops, bakeries, diners, and hardware stores that had shaped their lives. Posts poured in with captions like, "This is where my grandma used to buy flour," or "The man who runs this store gave my family credit during hard times. Now it's our turn to give back." In just 1 week, the movement spread from Arizona to New England. Churches, community centers, and schools began organizing fundraisers to help struggling family businesses. Some people paid off debts for store owners in secret, leaving behind handwritten notes that said only 2 words: "Keep believing." Others started volunteering in their neighborhoods, fixing broken signs, repainting storefronts, and restoring what had been forgotten. News outlets began covering the phenomenon, calling it the Belief Movement. It wasn't led by any foundation or politician. It was organic, born from an act of quiet humanity that had captured the world's heart. Lydia's Market became the unofficial symbol of the movement. Every week, letters arrived from places she'd never heard of: Alabama, Montana, even Alaska, each one telling a story of a community revived. Some enclosed photographs of smiling store owners, holding new signs that read, "Community Starts Here," a tribute to Lydia's own. She pinned every one on the growing wall of gratitude until it covered nearly the entire back room. When asked by reporters how she felt about being the face of a national campaign, Lydia simply smiled. "I'm not the face," she said. "I'm just proof that kindness still works." Meanwhile, Keanu stayed quiet. He declined interviews and avoided the spotlight. To him, the story had already done what it needed to do. It had reminded people of their better nature. But in the background, he kept the Phoenix Hope Foundation active. Every few months, new donations appeared in towns across the country, helping small shops on the brink of closure. The recipients never knew where the help came from, only that someone cared. One of his close friends, an old colleague from the film industry, once asked him over dinner why he didn't take credit. "You've inspired millions," his friend said. "Why not let people know you're behind it?" Keanu smiled, stirring his tea thoughtfully. "Because if you keep good things quiet," he said, "they echo louder." His friend nodded slowly, realizing there was no need to argue. Keanu wasn't doing this to build a legacy. He was doing it to build momentum for others to carry forward long after his part was done. Far from Hollywood's glare, Keanu often spent his weekends riding through small towns, stopping at forgotten shops, sometimes leaving anonymous envelopes under registers or quietly paying vendors' bills. To him, it wasn't charity. It was connection, the invisible thread that kept humanity stitched together. Months passed, and what started as a single story turned into a wave of renewal that reached far beyond the borders of the United States. In small towns and big cities alike, people began organizing what they called Hope Days. On these days, volunteers gathered to help restore local businesses, raise money for struggling owners, or simply show appreciation for the places that made their communities feel like home. Videos of storefront renovations and small business surprises flooded social media. The world was rediscovering the power of everyday goodness. In Detroit, a retired factory worker used his pension to save a neighborhood bakery from shutting down. In Oklahoma, a group of high school students raised enough money to reopen a mechanics shop for a veteran who had lost everything. Each post carried the same message, the same 2 words written on signs, shirts, and handwritten notes: "Keep believing." Even abroad, the ripple continued. A cafe owner in Ireland painted the words "Community starts here" on her front window, explaining in an interview that she had seen Lydia's story online. "It reminded me of what we lost during hard times," she said. "Now people come here not just for coffee, but for connection." Back in Dry Creek, Lydia watched the news one evening as images of people helping each other flashed across the screen. She sat at her kitchen table, her eyes glistening as she whispered, "Look at them, Tom. Look at what one act of kindness can do." The morning, she opened her store to find a small crowd waiting outside. A group of travelers from out of state had come to meet her, bringing gifts from their own hometowns: a jar of honey, a loaf of homemade bread, a small quilt stitched with the words, "Keep believing." They thanked her for being the spark that lit the fire. She smiled, hugged each one, and said the same thing every time: "I didn't start this. We all did." Meanwhile, Keanu continued his quiet work. He rarely spoke about the movement, but those who knew him could tell it had changed him. He spent more time traveling off the beaten path, visiting towns that no cameras ever reached. Sometimes he would stop by small shops at closing time, buying whatever they had left on the shelves. Other times he would leave folded bills under the counter, always signed with the same initials, PHF, for Phoenix Hope Foundation. One evening, while riding along the California coast, Keanu received a message from Lydia. It was simple: "The world's still keeping your note alive." Attached was a photo of a wall covered with hundreds of pinned messages from visitors, all repeating the same phrase in different handwriting, languages, and colors: "Keep believing." He smiled quietly, the ocean breeze brushing against his face as he put his phone away. The world didn't need to know who started it. It just needed to keep going. And somewhere in the soft roar of the waves, it felt like the echo of every small kindness was still growing, moving from one heart to another, quiet, endless, unstoppable. By the following spring, Lydia's life had changed in quiet, meaningful ways. The market still opened every morning at 8. The bell above the door still jingled the same way. And the smell of homemade bread still filled the air. But now, the woman behind the counter was no longer just the widow who refused to give up. She had become something more. A voice of hope for countless people who had once felt invisible. The invitations began as letters from nearby towns. Local business associations asked if Lydia would come and share her story with struggling shop owners. At first, she declined. "I'm no speaker," she said. "I just run a little store." But Rosie and Mr. Graham convinced her otherwise. "You've got something people need to hear," Rosie told her. "It's not about speeches, it's about truth." So Lydia agreed. Her first talk was held in a small library 2 towns over. About 30 people showed up, some taking notes, others just listening. She stood in front of them, nervous at first, clutching her husband's old pen for luck. Then she began to speak not with rehearsed lines, but from the heart. "I used to think small stores like mine didn't matter anymore," she said, "that we were just waiting for time to close us down. But what I learned is that we're not in the business of selling things. We're in the business of keeping people connected." Her voice wavered, but only for a moment. The audience leaned forward, captivated by her honesty. "A stranger once walked into my store when I was about to lose everything," she continued. "He didn't know my name, but he saw me. And when you've been invisible long enough, being seen is the first step toward believing again." When she finished, The room erupted in applause. People lined up afterward just to shake her hand or hug her. Many of them whispered things like, "That's exactly how I feel," or "You reminded me why I started my business in the first place." After that day, the invitations multiplied. Lydia traveled to small towns across the Southwest, always paying her own way, always refusing honorariums. She would stand in school gyms, community centers, and libraries, telling the same story in her quiet, sincere voice. "One stranger believed in me," she would always say at the end, "but I had to believe first." Her words spread faster than she could have imagined. Soon, videos of her talks began circulating online. Viewers called her America's storekeeper, though she never called herself that. She didn't talk about Keanu or the documentary unless someone asked. Instead, she talked about resilience, about community, and about what it meant to keep faith alive in a world that often forgets the small things that matter most. Each time she returned home to Dry Creek, she would walk into her store, place her travel bag behind the counter, and touch the framed note from Keanu. "Still keeping the promise," she'd whisper. Lydia's role as a mentor began to reach far beyond the Southwest. After the release of the documentary and the growth of the belief movement, organizations from across the country began inviting her to speak. She found herself standing on stages she never imagined: state fairs, university panels, even televised community summits. Each time, she carried the same humble tone that had always defined her. She didn't use slides or flashy words. She simply spoke about resilience, about the small miracles that begin when people decide not to give up. Her story was more than inspiring. It was grounding. People said that hearing Lydia reminded them of their grandparents, of small-town decency, of the America that lived in corner stores and neighborly kindness. When asked how she stayed so calm under the attention, Lydia always smiled and said, "Because I still sweep my own floors." Eventually, she started mentoring shop owners one-on-one. Some came to visit Dry Creek. Others called her for advice. A young woman from New Mexico reached out after her bakery burned down, saying she didn't know how to start again. Lydia told her, "Don't rebuild what was lost. Build what you believe in now." Months later, that bakery reopened with a new name, Belief Bread Company, and sent Lydia a thank you card that read, "You reminded me that hope doesn't retire." Lydia's approach was simple but powerful. She didn't teach business strategy. She taught courage. Her sessions always began with the same quiet line: "If you want people to believe in your store, you have to believe in it first." Then she'd tell her own story about Tom's dream, the empty shelves, the stranger who walked in one dusty afternoon, and the note that changed everything. Everywhere she went, she carried that note in a small frame, wrapped in cloth. After each event, people lined up just to see it. Many would touch the glass for luck, as if it carried a spark of the kindness that had started it all. Lydia never corrected them. In her eyes, it wasn't superstition. It was connection. As the years passed, Lydia began writing short reflections that were published in community newsletters and local papers. Her most famous piece was titled "Faith in Small Things," where she wrote, "Hope doesn't arrive like thunder. It walks in quietly, buys a soda, and leaves a note behind." That line spread everywhere, quoted in articles, classrooms, and even printed on mugs sold in local stores. Yet Lydia never sought profit from her newfound fame. She still lived in the same modest house, still cooked the same simple dinners, and still closed the market at sunset. But her purpose had expanded. Her store had become a living classroom, every customer a reminder, every conversation a lesson. And at the end of every speech, no matter where she was, Lydia always said the same words: "One stranger believed in me, but I had to believe first." The crowd always rose to their feet, not because she spoke loudly, but because she spoke truth. The city was quiet that night. The lights of Los Angeles shimmered beyond the window of Keanu's modest home, casting reflections across the wooden desk where he sat. Before him rested a simple object, a jar of strawberry jam. The label, slightly faded, still read, "Made with gratitude." It was the same jar Lydia had given him months earlier, and though he'd carried it through every trip since, he had never opened it. It wasn't just jam anymore. It was a reminder, a symbol of everything that could grow from a single small act. He turned it slowly in his hands, the glass catching the soft glow of the lamp. He thought about Lydia, about the life that now pulsed through Dry Creek, about the laughter of children running past her storefront. He had seen the documentary once, quietly, alone, and had turned it off before it ended. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he cared too much. Seeing his name in that story felt wrong to him. The truth was, Lydia's courage had saved the town. He had only held out a hand. He opened his worn leather journal and flipped through the pages filled with notes, sketches, and half-formed thoughts. Then he found a blank one and began to write slowly, carefully, as if the words themselves carried weight. The smallest act can rebuild something invisible. Faith. He paused, tapping the pen against the paper. He underlined the word faith once, then leaned back in his chair, reading the line over. It felt right, simple, quiet, and true. For a long moment, he sat in silence, the hum of the city faint in the background. His phone buzzed once with a new message, an article link from a friend titled, "How One Store Sparked a Movement." He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew what it said. Instead, he closed his journal, stood and walked to the window. Below him, the streets glowed with soft amber lights. He could see the small grocery on the corner of his block, still open late, the clerk waving to a couple of customers. It made him smile. The world was full of little stores like that, quiet places that kept people together, even when no one noticed. He thought of Lydia's words from their last meeting. He didn't save a shop. He reminded us who we were. That line had never left him. Keanu set the jar of jam back on the desk, next to a postcard Lydia had once sent him that simply said, "Keep believing, always." He picked up his motorcycle keys, slipping them into his jacket pocket. The road, he felt, was calling again, not for fame or recognition, but for quiet observation, for connection. He left the house softly, the city alive, but calm. The motorcycle waited in the driveway, gleaming faintly under the porch light. As he fastened his helmet, he whispered to himself, "Let's see who still believes out there." The engine came to life. A steady hum cutting through the ground, night air. The road stretched ahead, long and empty, painted silver by the moonlight. Keanu rode through the quiet edges of Los Angeles, the hum of his motorcycle echoing softly through the canyons. The air smelled faintly of rain, the kind that hadn't fallen yet, but promised to. He didn't have a destination, just a direction north, toward the open land where small towns still breathed beneath the noise of the modern world. He stopped first at a roadside cafe just outside Santa Clarita. The neon sign flickered, and the windows glowed dimly with the last customers of the night. Inside, the waitress wiped down the counter, humming an old tune. Keanu ordered coffee and sat by the window. On the wall behind him hung a framed note, written in the same looping script he recognized from Dry Creek. "Keep believing." It seemed the message had traveled further than even Lydia knew. When he left a few minutes later, he placed a folded 20 under his cup and whispered, "For the next cup of someone who needs it." Then he got back on his bike. As the miles passed, he found traces of the movement everywhere. In a small town near Fresno, a bakery had a handwritten sign that read, "Community starts here." In another, a hardware store had a jar by the register labeled, "The Belief Fund, give if you can, take if you need." Each one was a piece of the same story, carried by unseen hands and open hearts. He rode for hours, stopping only to watch dawn rise over the horizon. The sky turned gold, then pink, and the first light touched the windows of the tiny stores along the main street of a town he didn't even know the name of. Each one had its own story. Families inside, working together, friends laughing, neighbors helping neighbors. The world was still imperfect, still uncertain, but in those moments he could see something unbreakable holding it together. Keanu parked his motorcycle by a small general store with peeling white paint. An elderly man sat on the porch, sipping coffee from a tin mug. When Keanu waved, the man lifted his mug in greeting and smiled. "Beautiful morning," the man said. "It is," Keanu replied. "You run this place?" "Used to be my father's," the man said. "Almost lost it during the pandemic, but some folks helped me keep it. Strangers, mostly. Said they saw a story about a woman's store down in Arizona. Guess kindness spreads faster than bad news." Keanu nodded, his chest tightening with quiet emotion. "That's good to hear," he said. "Really good." When he rode off again, the road ahead glimmered with light. Town after town passed, and in each, the signs of hope appeared small, but steady. He didn't stop to take photos, didn't leave a mark, didn't need to. As the sun rose higher, he pulled over on a hill overlooking miles of open land. He turned off the engine and let the silence surround him. The wind was soft, carrying the faint scent of blooming sage. He looked out and smiled, whispering the same words he had written in his journal. The smallest act can rebuild something invisible faith. Then, he put on his helmet, started the engine, and disappeared into the golden morning. The sun rose warm and clear over Dry Creek, bathing the town in soft gold. It was exactly 1 year since Lydia's market had reopened its doors, and the whole town was preparing for what they now called the Belief Festival. What had started as a small gathering to honor the market's survival had grown into a celebration that brought hundreds of people from nearby towns and even a few from across the country. Lydia arrived early that morning, her arms full of decorations. Rosie was already outside, stringing lights across the front awning, while the teenagers painted colorful chalk messages on the sidewalk. Keep believing. Community starts here. Faith in small things. The air smelled of fresh bread and roasted coffee, drifting from the diner down the street. By mid-morning, the music began. A local band played near the old fountain, and families gathered with picnic blankets and lawn chairs. The veterans group set up a booth to serve homemade chili. The school children sold baked goods, and every table carried some version of Lydia's strawberry jam. Laughter filled the air, the kind that felt effortless and familiar. Lydia stood by the front door of her market, watching it all unfold. She had set up a small wooden sign by the entrance. It read in simple white letters, "For the man who reminded us to believe." People paused as they entered, touching the sign, gently, as if it were sacred. Inside, the shelves gleamed, every corner stocked with local goods. The gratitude corner was now an entire wall, overflowing with photos and handwritten notes. Visitors from other towns added their own stories, some about stores that had survived because of help from strangers, others about people they'd inspired to do the same. Rosie came up beside Lydia, handing her a cup of lemonade.
You realize this whole town looks forward to this day more than Christmas now?
That's because this one belongs to all of us. Rosie nodded. You think he knows? Lydia smiled faintly. I think he feels it. People like him always do. The afternoon passed in waves of music and laughter. A small stage had been set up in front of the market where local musicians performed. Between songs, Lydia was invited up to speak. The crowd quieted as she stepped forward, microphone in hand. I used to think this store was my husband's dream, she said, her voice carrying gently across the square. But now I realize it was meant for everyone. It taught me that one act of kindness can change a whole town, maybe even the world. Applause rolled through the crowd, warm and full of affection. Lydia smiled and added, "To the stranger who reminded me to believe you're part of us forever." She stepped down, her eyes misty, and Rosie slipped an arm around her shoulders. Together they watched as lanterns were lit along the street, glowing softly as evening began to fall. As night settled over Dry Creek, the festival lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth. Music drifted through the warm air, mingling with the scent of grilled food and wildflowers. Children ran between booths carrying paper lanterns, their laughter echoing against the soft strum of guitars. The whole town pulsed with joy, not from wealth or spectacle, but from something pure, shared gratitude. Lydia stood near the porch of her store, her heart full. She watched generations mix effortlessly, veterans trading stories with teenagers, families gathered in laughter, couples dancing slowly under strings of golden bulbs. She thought of Tom and the promise they once made to always keep the market open for the heart, not the profit. Tonight, she knew she had kept that promise. She turned to the entrance again, to the little wooden sign. "For the man who reminded us to believe." A small group of visitors stood before it, quietly reading the words. One woman touched the wood gently, whispering to her son, "He must have been an angel." Lydia smiled. "No," she said softly, "just a good man on a long road." A few miles outside of town, the low rumble of a motorcycle carried through the still desert air. Keanu slowed as the glow of the festival appeared ahead, a shimmer of lanterns, laughter, and song. From the highway ridge, he could see the familiar storefront lit up brighter than he had ever seen it. Even from that distance, the sign out front was visible, white letters gleaming in the dark. He stopped at the side of the road, turning off the engine. The night was calm, the stars sharp and clear. He took off his helmet and rested it on the seat, watching the small town flicker below. The music reached him faintly, carried on the wind, along with the hum of people celebrating something simple, yet rare hope. He smiled. He didn't need to go closer. The scene before him was enough. He could feel what the town had become, what Lydia had built, what kindness had multiplied into. The world didn't need him there to witness it. It was already alive. He whispered to the open air, "You did it, Lydia." After a moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the same jar of jam, the one he had carried for a year, untouched. The label had faded more, but the handwriting remained. He twisted it open, just enough to catch the faint scent of strawberries and sugar. Then he closed it again carefully and set it beside him on the bike seat, as if honoring a small piece of history. The wind stirred gently across the desert, carrying faint echoes of laughter and the ringing of bells from the festival. Keanu looked up at the stars and took a deep breath, the corners of his mouth lifting into that quiet smile the world knew so well. He placed the jar back in his pack, started the engine, and rode off toward the horizon. The glow of Dry Creek faded behind him, but its warmth stayed in the air, lingering like the aftertaste of kindness that refuses to fade. The night wind followed Keanu as he rode across the darkened highway, his headlights slicing through the stillness. Behind him, Dry Creek glowed faintly like a constellation that had found its place again. He didn't need to look back to know that the market lights were still on, that laughter still filled the air, and that Lydia's world was alive. He had seen enough to understand something rare, that one simple act could outlive its moment and ripple through countless lives. Back in Los Angeles, a few days later, Keanu sat at his desk once more. The jar of jam rested beside him, the same one that had traveled thousands of miles and now felt more like a symbol than a keepsake. He opened his journal again, flipping to the page where he had written his quiet reflection months before. Beneath the line, "The smallest act can rebuild something invisible faith." He began to write again. Some places don't exist to sell. They exist to connect. He paused, the words sinking into the silence of the cell. Room. He thought of all the towns he'd seen, all the stores that stood like tiny anchors holding communities together. They weren't just businesses, they were living spaces of kindness, trust, and memory. When those places vanished, It wasn't just buildings that disappeared. It was the sense of belonging that people carried. He set his pen down and looked out the window. Below, the city was alive. As always, cars moving, people rushing, lights flashing endlessly. But somewhere beyond that noise, he knew there were still small corners of peace, where a store owner knew every customer's name, where a stranger could still find kindness in a cup of coffee. As he sat there, the sound of laughter from the street below reached him faintly. It reminded him of Dry Creek, of children running by the storefront, of Lydia's smile when she said, "Tom would have loved this." Those moments weren't his. They belonged to the world now. And that was enough. In his next entry, he wrote only a single sentence: "Kindness doesn't end when you leave, it keeps walking." Days later, footage from the Belief Festival surfaced online. The video opened with an aerial shot of Dry Creek, glowing beneath strings of lights. Music played softly as the camera swept through the crowd. Neighbors hugging, families laughing, children carrying lanterns. The screen faded to the image of Lydia's market, bright and full again. Over that image, Keanu's recorded voice played gently, his words calm and steady. "Some places don't exist to sell. They exist to connect." The video ended with Lydia standing at the entrance, gazing up at the sign that read, "For the man who reminded us to believe." Then the final line faded across the screen. "One act of kindness can save a community." People all over the world watched it. Some cried quietly. Others shared it with messages like, "Faith restored in humanity." In comments and captions, people began writing their own vows to help one person, to protect one small place, to believe in second chances again. The story had come full circle. And though Keanu had no part in the broadcast, his voice continued to echo far beyond his own intention. Because belief, once sparked, never truly went out. It just found new homes. The video's impact was immediate and lasting. Within days, it reached millions of views. Messages poured in from every corner of the world. Stories of people buying groceries for struggling families, paying off debts for local shops, and volunteering to rebuild stores that had fallen silent. Hashtags like #KeepBelieving and #1 act of kindness trended again. Not because of marketing, but because people recognized themselves in the story. They saw Lydia, and they saw the stranger who chose to help quietly, without expecting anything in return. At Lydia's market, life moved forward as it always had. The shelves were full, the porch light stayed warm, and the laughter of customers carried through the street. Every evening, she took a moment to step outside and watch the sunset, her hands resting on the same wooden railing she once leaned on in fear. Now, she leaned there in peace. She never knew when or if Keanu would return again, but she no longer needed to wonder. She understood what he had meant when he said the store didn't sell things, it kept people. Because even after he was gone, that truth remained visible in every person who walked through her door. One afternoon, a delivery truck stopped outside, dropping off a single wooden crate. There was no note, no signature, just a small card taped to the lid. Lydia opened it slowly. Inside were jars of local jam from towns across the country, each one labeled, "Community starts here." On the card were 5 handwritten words: "Still believing, everywhere you go." She smiled and placed the crate beneath the gratitude wall. It was never about who sent it. It was about the message that never stopped traveling. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu rode along the Pacific Coast Highway as the sun began to sink into the ocean. The wind pressed against his jacket. The sound of the waves followed beside him, and in that endless stretch of light, he felt at peace. The world didn't need heroes, it just needed reminders. In his journal, the final line he wrote before setting out again was simple: "Every act of goodness is a seed. You may never see the tree, but it will grow." And as the story of Lydia's market continued to inspire countless others, one truth remained. At its core, hope multiplies through action. The smallest gesture, the briefest kindness, can rebuild what many believe is lost. If you could save one place from disappearing, what would it be? Tell us in the comments below. And if you believe in second chances, don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories. Stories that remind us that faith, once given, never truly fades.